waiting for you. One by one we will take you.
So, top five?
We're here to do a top five. Yes. And as those of you who know who watch us regularly, our top fives really are top tens because Tim picks five and I pick five because we decided we would do our top five subgenres of our genre. So for those of you listening, Johnny has the keys. Tim usually delves into the horror element. I usually delve into the science fiction element. So this week we decided, okay, what are our favorite subgenres of each of our respective genre? And again, like always, we didn't give each other any criteria. We just kind of said, hey, come up with your own and do it. So it'll be interesting to compare them and see. So we each picked five. I just came up with my own categories. I rewrote them several times and finally said, okay, these are the ones that I would create as subgenres. These are my subgenres that I like. Number five is alien influence, is what I called it. So an alien influence story, that could be invasion, it could be possession, it could be encounters, interstellar war, whatever, but with an alien species. It has movies like Fear, War of the Worlds, Species, that kind of stuff. But it also has like Arrival, which is, we never really see the aliens till halfway through that, but it's definitely a more Earth-based story, but it's with aliens. So anything with alien influence was my number five.
Well, my criteria, I came up with multiple subgenres. I had like 18 at one time, and I was like, I can't pick. So I did try to condense them into broader genre, and now I'm down to 13. Since some fit into more than one category, I kind of went with the dominant trait of the category. I'll let you know what the other categories I didn't choose were later. It's your sister, Cheryl! My number five is the slasher killer genre. I love these movies. They're kind of like candy to me, or comfort food, as sometimes I use that phrase, but they're not, obviously not my number one subgenre. These movies would include things like Friday the 13th, which is kind of supernatural, Halloween, which is kind of supernatural, but Nightmare on Elm Street would also be in there, which is very supernatural. Scream, which is not supernatural at all. Black Christmas, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and the list goes on. So that's my number five.
My number four is a derivation of one, but I call it, but it's listed in a lot of people's subgenres, which is space opera. By that, it doesn't mean opera like the musical opera. It's actually a take on soap opera. So the big tenets of space opera are usually melodramatic, risky adventures, chivalric romance. It's stuff like Star Wars, Star Trek, Fifth Element, those kind of things. So a space opera type of story.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
My number four is folk horror. This has been a topic of ours a lot the last year or so since we watched The Witch. And I also mentioned that Woodlands Dark and Deep, or whatever the name of it is, that documentary on folk horror. But I didn't realize that it had been with us as long as it has. I had originally included like witches as their own genre, and then I realized, you know what, they really kind of fall into the folk horror genre. So I would include movies like The Witch in this, but I would also include movies like The Wicker Man, about a mysterious cult-like society that sacrifices people. Midsommar, same thing. There's a movie called The Apostle that's on our list. We haven't watched it yet, but I would classify it. But I talked about a movie called The Wailing, which is a Korean film not too long ago. That would fit into folk horror. And Children of the Corn, the Stephen King movie, fits into this category. So
let me ask you, when you were categorizing folk horror, does it have to be nature? Like Dunwich Horror. Dunwich Horror is Lovecraftian, but it's more a satanic cult thing. Is that folk? Or how would you classify that?
Wow, that's a hard one. I mean, I classify folk as more folklore.
Natural. Okay, folklore. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
The Dunwich Horror actually would be classified, if you're looking at Lovecraft aficionados, as cosmic horror. So that's another subgenre.
So maybe like the Babadook or stuff that's story, like you said, that's more of a folklore legend kind of story, Wendigo or whatever.
Exactly. It also could be, like I said, a fringe society that's not, within the norm, like that movie, what's it called? The Village. That would
That's a
probably
great
fall in
example
folklores, too.
My number 3, one of my favorite categories, that's why it's in my top 3, space. Space in general, having to deal with space, and the majority of the story is set in space. So things like even Alien, even though Alien has a subgenre of horror, it's set in space. 2001, that series I love, The Expanse. The predominant location of the story is spacebound, not planet-bound. So that's one of my huge subcategories.
So do you think that Star Trek falls more into the space category than the space opera category?
No, I think it still stays in space opera because the storytelling is very broad. Even in the modern ones, it's still very melodramatic, very socially relevant oriented, lots of personal relationships. It's mostly focused on that rather than the thought that space itself is a viable threat to you, or could be. Mm-hmm. In Alien, you're very aware you're in space. You're like, you can't go outside, without the suits on or anything else. The same thing with 2001. 2001 is hugely, dependent upon the fact that we are in this environment. Gravity is a great one that's more realistic, but it's a story about space being an actual element that's important.
Beat them or burn them. They go up pretty easy.
My number 3 could technically be a subcategory of one of my other subgenres, but there are so many of them that I had to just branch out and do it as its own, and that would be vampire movies. I could have put it in creature/monsters, but I didn't because there's just too many of them, and there's too many of them that I like, including Interview with a Vampire. Those are the more intelligent, sophisticated vampires, whereas you have 30 Days of Night, savage vampires.
Love them.
Love that movie. Let the Right One In, which is a movie we've covered on this podcast. Great story. Near Dark, an old favorite of ours from the 80s. Midnight Mass. But
it also includes like Bram Stoker's Dracula, the classic Dracula,
right.
all the True Blood,
Fright Night.
Yeah, I could see that as a subgenre over the other monster genres, i.e. mummy, zombie, creature itself, werewolf. Sort of thing.
Right.
Werewolf. Yeah, I could see that. Yeah. My number 2 is probably your favorite science fiction subgenre, which is apocalyptic. So this would include any kind of dystopias, imminent destruction, warfare, cataclysm, climate, whatever. So you have anything from 1984 to Armageddon to Blade Runner, even to Matrix sort of thing, which is it's set in a time where cataclysm or dystopia is part of it. Matrix isn't apocalyptic like the end until you really get into like 2 and 3 in the series. But Matrix itself is a dystopia. When he finds out what reality is, it's not a pleasant human condition sort of thing. So
why are you torturing me like this?
My number 2 is paranormal.
Yep.
This is another one of those categories that's kind of broad because I always associated paranormal with ghosts, but it's also where you would categorize something like telekinesis, like Carrie, because that is paranormal, quote, activity. It would include, though, my favorite ghost movies, The Haunting of Hill House series on Netflix, The Haunting of Bly Manor on Netflix, The Shining, The Innocents, which we just covered on the podcast this year, The Sixth Sense, for you fans of James Wan out there. The Conjuring would fall into this category. For you Stephen King fans, I mentioned Carrie, but he also did The Shining and 1408, which is a great ghost story.
I think that's a great number 2 for you. Okay, well, my number 1, again, hard for us to create these categories or to come up with them, but mine is technology terror. That's number 1. So the fear of technology is part of the story. So that includes robots, AI, time travel. And maybe terror is not the right word. It could be technology conflict, maybe. The technology is integral to the storytelling, whether it's Minority Report, The Abyss, Gravity, Looper, I Am Mother, all of those, anything, I, Robot, even though it's a terrible movie, but the book is good. But technology is the reason for the story. Either we're developing new technology and we have to deal with its outcome, or it's already existing and now it's malfunctioning and we have to fix it. If you're a Snowpiercer fan, it's the frickin' train.
My number one is going
Dun,
to
dun,
be,
dun.
yeah, it's very suspenseful. I'm sure you're just never going to be able to guess. It would be zombies.
What?
Or / infected.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Because that category is a little bit broader than the dead coming back to life now. This is another one of those where zombies could technically be in the monster category, but there's just too many of them, just like vampire movies, that it really needs its own category. And they're my favorites because most of them are also post-apocalyptic. So I like them for that as well. Dawn of the Dead, Night of the Living Dead, definitely favorites, but I also love 28 Days Later, which falls into that infected realm. The Walking Dead, which is more traditional, and then Train to Busan, which is more the infected route. Again, just another country. There's a movie called Cargo that we have not covered that is really good that I would classify in that genre. Yeah, so zombies are the best.
I had a couple of honorable mentions.
Okay.
I wanted to do. One was Parallel Worlds. That whole parallel world thing I've always liked. I think that's why the mirror universe is brought up on Star Trek all the time. There's a lot of parallel worlds in like time travel because, you did something and now suddenly it's altered and changed and different. Sci-fi horror. That one was hard for me to pull out and not put in because you and I both know how much I love it and love Alien, The Thing. And then the one that it was on everybody's list, so I had to put it in honorable mention, Cyberpunk. I have always associated cyberpunk, the word and the subgenre, with William Gibson. The definition coming from Gibson was a combo of low life but high tech. And I thought that was a really cool definition because it usually deals with, drug dealers, gangs, but they have implants and all this high tech that goes on, but you're usually dealing with very low life element.
My honorable mentions are, I mentioned earlier, monster creatures. That category is in my honorable mentions because these three just barely didn't make the list. And that would include movies that do include werewolf or the Frankenstein monster, but it also goes more modern with things like It Follows, The Descent.
Oh, yep.
Is another creature
I could
movie.
see that. That's two great ones.
It would also include It, because Pennywise is a creature, or The Mist, those monsters in The Mist. And then the biggie, of course, would be Godzilla. I can't leave him out.
Oh, yeah.
Like you, another one of my honorable mentions is sci-fi horror. I love sci-fi horror. I love Alien. I love The Thing, The Fly, A Quiet Place. All of those to me are great sci-fi movies. And then lastly, demonic possession. It's either a satanic movie or a possession movie. Movies like The Exorcist, however, The Omen would also fall in that category because it's like an Antichrist kind of thing. But I would also go as far as to say The Evil Dead would fit in this category. Or that Italian movie I love, Demons, that would fit in this category as well.
Yeah. I remember one in late 70s, early 80s that scared me was The Sentinel.
And then last, the ones I excluded that I also came up with when I was trying to come up with these, and I narrowed it down to 13. Psychological, which would include Psycho, Silence of the Lamb, Misery, torture porn or gore, Saw, Hostel, The Loved Ones, Audition. I guess you could probably put body horror in there as well. I don't know. Some are good, some are really not good at all. Gothic horror, Crimson Peak, Sleepy Hollow, The Woman in Black. Cosmic or Lovecraftian horror, which is basically mostly Lovecraft, In the Mouth of Madness, The Color Out of Space. But there is a movie out there called The Void. I don't know if you've seen that, but it's very cosmic-y. And then comedy horror. I mean, some of these I really do like, but they're not in my favorites. And they are Shaun of the Dead, which I love. Glorious, which I watched recently, and that's a Lovecraftian comedy. Reanimator could probably fall into this category.
I mean, this was hard just because, and we're trying to pick our favorite, not just what we're saying, this is the way it should be classified.
No,
It's just our favorite type of genres.
Yeah, that's going to do us for today. Our top 5 subgenres of horror and science fiction, our top 5 favorites, I should say. If you like what you hear, we've got other shows out there for you. Be sure and subscribe down below, or check out our regular show where we go in depth on a full-length movie, usually anywhere in the last 100 years. We're picking a sci-fi or horror movie. We do it 40 times a year, and it's called Johnny Has the Keys. And until next time, David, I'll be seeing you.
See ya.
Bye.
You can't start the